All right. We have a quorum. My name is Carrie Keenan. Jessica Shate and I are the co-chairs of this committee, which usually meets monthly. This is our April meeting. As per the governor's order, we've been meeting remotely. This meeting is being recorded and is currently live streaming on YouTube. It will be accessible on the Community Board 4 website after post-meeting. The agenda for tonight is public and can be viewed on the website. We encourage you to sign up for eBlast to get the agenda. If this is your first time at a Community Board 4 meeting, there are 3 things to know about this process. After each presentation, first, the committee will ask questions to the presenter, then members of the public or attendees can ask questions or make a comment. Subsequently, the discussion goes back to the committee. On some agenda items, committee members may next vote to make a recommendation. I do not think we have any votes tonight, which usually results in a letter to the full board to vote on. If you want to comment or ask a question after a presentation and after the committee has spoken, you may press the raised hand button on your screen, usually on the bottom right. If you're calling in, use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. If you have any questions regarding what I just shared, please raise your hand now. As I see no hands, I will turn it over to Jessica for the first item on our agenda.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all. As Carrie said, we have a brief agenda today, and again, appreciate everybody's flexibility in the new meeting time. But today we are joined by Rebuild by Design, which I encourage all of you to look up, a nonprofit that does work to support resiliency and good practices. And they are partnering with Syracuse University to present on a project they've been working on under cities at risk. And so they've been doing some important work, and I see we're joined by a lot of smiling faces. So I'm gonna just kick it over to them. I think what we can expect is, I think we said maybe a 15 to 20 minute presentation followed by time for questions and opportunity for us to weigh in and reflect on what they've offered. They're coming to us as a group of students, largely who've dug into understanding the challenges we face here on the west side of Manhattan and are looking for ideas and feedback and guidance. All of us should feel free to give that feedback, but do remember they're students who are approaching this work. So you can take the gloves off that we often use with developers and others who we come really trying to get them to see our particular perspective, that they are in fact students. So Jeanette, are you teeing us off or?
Sure. Thank you so much,
Great.
Jessica, for the introduction and for having us here, Jessie, Carrie, and the whole land use committee and the community board. We are really so grateful for your feedback and help. We have a presentation. Maybe we can share it, or you prefer to share it yourself? What do you think is best?
You can share it, Jeanette, if you've got it ready to go.
Okay, so perfect. I will share the introduction, and then the students will tell me if they prefer to show. Okay, so 1 second. See? Okay. So tell me if you can see anything. Okay. Can you see everything right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, thank you again for having us here today. My name is Janet Sordi, and I'm teaching a class at Syracuse University together with Amy Chester. As some of you might know her, she's the director of Rebuild by Design, and Rebuild by Design has been working for over 10 years now on how to assess the climate risk for New York City, and in particular flooding risk. We kind of started from this idea, that the whole Manhattan and other areas in New York City are really vulnerable to storm surge and hurricanes. And also we expect 3 to 6 feet of sea level rise that can put all the communities at risk. So the city first and the government, and also in our class, we see this as an opportunity to also develop projects that can make community more resilient. So not only address risk. There is a project that is funded in the wave of Hurricane Sandy, which is the BU, where you probably know about this project. And this really goes along the East River and Lower Manhattan, but it stops at Chambers Street. So there is no current flood plan for the area above Chambers Street. And so with this in mind, Rebuild by Design has started to engage with the community boards and the Senator Holleman's office and trying to develop possible scenarios. So in order to have a sort of brainstorming and to start collecting ideas and so on, we suggested to Syracuse University that we could include students in this effort and see if they can help come up with ideas that could serve the west side of Manhattan. So we are working with 15 students on 5 focus areas. And the students have been talking to community boards, to business, to the Central Business District, to Greenwich Village, Tribeca, Hudson Yards, and today we are here talking to you and showing us our strategies that on one hand try to solve or address the main risks that are threatening the city, but also use this as an opportunity to improve the overall resilience. So today, Laura, Grace, and Maya will be here presenting to you their work on Chelsea. I will leave it to her. Probably it's easier for them to share the screen as well. Or would you like me to share the presentation?
No, we can share our screen. I think you have to stop sharing first, though.
You're right. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Here we go.
Let me move it to slideshow. Okay.
All righty. So hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. We're excited to present with you today. I am Grace. This is Laura, and this is Maya over here. And we're doing the making of a green district on the west side of Manhattan. So for our introduction, our research was found through site visits, looking onto online databases, as well as research done by our fellow students last semester who are also part of this course. And our ultimate goal is to create a green district that addresses and improves water management, social resilience, and air quality. And so the Green District employs these technologies and strategies to help alleviate pollution, promote community, and address the future of climate change. So our priorities are the following: adapt streetscape to improve flooding prevention and pedestrian engagement, develop more green spaces and parks, incorporate more efficient methods of water management along the shoreline, and to design long-term economic resilience and social resilience. So this is the current built environment of Chelsea, looking at the permeability of the ground. And as you can see by the pie charts on the side, compared to overall Manhattan and land use, the Chelsea-Clinton area has a substantially lower amount of green space. So one of our goals is to kind of help take advantage of possible vacant land or land that is not used as much along the waterfront, and to start bringing in more green space. So one of the focuses we have is flooding, where nuisance flooding is referred to as low levels of flooding that do not pose significant threats to public safety or major property damage, but they can disrupt routine day-to-day activities, put added strain on infrastructure systems such as roadways and sewers, and they do cause minor property damage. And so this is our flooding map looking at heavy rain. So this map examines the relationship between extreme projected rainfall, the subway system, and the current sewer system and sewer depositories. And as we can see, there's significant flooding that happens along the shoreline, but also flooding along 8th and 7th Avenues, which can also result in subway flooding as well.
Another type of flooding is storm surge. So storm surge is when the water is pushed towards the shore by the force of the winds moving cyclonically around the storm. And since Chelsea does have that waterfront edge, it is more susceptible to storm surge. So looking at this storm surge map, we looked at the 500-year flood. So it's the worst case scenario flood and the permeability as well as the elevations of Chelsea. And so in the worst case scenario, that flood has the potential to move halfway into the community. We also looked at ways to look at carbon reduction, and by looking at the intensity of greenhouse gases in Chelsea, as well as the green roofs and the tree canopies, there is this pretty interesting distinction between areas with higher levels of plant life versus areas that are lower levels and have more greenhouse gas intensity. We also looked at the air quality, specifically the CO2 emission rates from car idling. And those emission rates were much higher around residential areas, especially in that middle area of Chelsea. And the last thing we looked at was social resilience, which is defined as the ability of a social system to respond and recover from disasters. The system has to absorb impacts and cope with an event as well as a post-event, with adaptive processes that facilitate the ability of the social system to reorganize, change, and learn in response to a threat. So the way that we looked and diagrammed social resilience, we looked at income levels, food insecurity, and access to food. And because of Chelsea's history of gentrification, it is sort of a hodgepodge, I guess you could call it, of having blocks that are that have residents with really, really high incomes right next to blocks that make less than like 31K a year of for their residents, and a wide range of food insecurity and food access kind of just being all over the neighborhood.
So this is our first area of interest and intervention, which is along the shoreline. And the main focuses are flooding and storm surge. And then the next one that we will go to is Nycha housing with a focus on social resilience. And then our last area is the 6th, 7th, and 8th avenues, which focus on flooding, carbon emissions, as well as air quality. So here's our strategy diagram looking at our 4 primary methods of design intervention, which are water management, community green space, air filtration strategies, as well as neighborhood preservation. So starting with the shoreline, the main challenges, as stated before, are storm surge and flooding, and our strategies to address these issues are the underground basin, pervious asphalt, pocket parks, berms, and flood walls. So starting with underground basins, this is a large-scale intervention that goes underground to absorb excess water from flooding and can store it to then release it slowly into a drainage system. And the benefits is that it can handle large-scale flooding. It can be put into the existing green spaces without disrupting and building up to take away from public space. And the slow release of excess water would not overpower the drainage system. The next tool is pervious asphalt, which is asphalt that absorbs water instead of running it off into the sewer system. And it would be paved directly over the ground. It's long lasting, it's less susceptible to potholes and breaks. It contributes again to less runoff, and it contributes less to temperatures. And it is cost efficient in the long run and a good investment, but it would require taking up from the current asphalt that is already there. So the next one is pocket parks, which are public parks that can collect excess rainwater, and they usually do that through a depression in the landscape. And the benefits of this tool is it's a small reservoir. It can help combat against nuisance flooding, and it also provides a nice park area for residents during just day-to-day activities, and that once again provides more permeable ground space. And then the berm is defined as a terrace of land, either man-made or natural, that rises above high tides and acts as a hill between the water and the inland. And this specifically helps with storm surge from entering into Chelsea, and it can absorb rainwater and reduce nuisance flooding, specifically from the river. And it would require adding on top of the existing ground, so below grade infrastructure would not be affected. And it can help keep the green space that's already existing along the waterfront. So the last one for this specific intervention area is the flood wall, which is a vertical artificial barrier that is specifically put in again to help against high tides and storm surge. And this can additionally be worked into existing infrastructure along Chelsea Pier, specifically looking into like where the sports pier is, and you already have like more commodities in that area. And it would help to mitigate building over what is already currently existing. And so this is the interventions map where the berm is built up on the northern shore of Chelsea, and then highway traffic would move underneath the berm. As the shoreline transitions from green space to the Chelsea Sports Pier, the berm transitions into a flood wall, which continues down the western side of the highway. And by implementing the berm and flood wall, we are able to maximize current green space while not disrupting the current waterfront infrastructure.
So our next area of intervention is the Nycha housing blocks. And the challenge there is social resilience. And our strategies to address that are preserving housing in the area and programming empty storefronts. So as far as preserving housing, we would be preserving the price of housing and keeping the existing buildings for the residents rather than making new developments. And this we would do in hopes of keeping the current residents in the area and preventing them from being displaced due to rising rents and really like expensive new developments coming into the area. So it would address income disparity within Chelsea, promote adaptive reuse, and would reduce future carbon emissions from new housing construction, and would stimulate the economy. And through programming empty storefronts, we would take vacant retail spaces and occupy them with small local businesses, such as fresh grocery stores or community gardens. And then, of course, we would provide financial incentives to local entrepreneurs and support them opening their new business. And then this would offer more opportunity for getting local fresh groceries to address some of the food access in the area. It would also decrease carbon emissions from traveling in order to get groceries and provide additional job opportunities. And it would also stimulate the economy in that way. So this is showing some of the price trends for the rents in Chelsea versus the whole of Manhattan in complexes with a doorman versus without a doorman. And as you can see in Chelsea, the prices are elevated as compared to the rest of Manhattan. And so we are, through our interventions, we are trying to mitigate the fluctuating housing costs in Chelsea, at least for lower to middle income residents. And then this is our overall map of where some of the empty storefronts are currently located that we could reprogram with new spaces. And as prices rise, Nycha residents face risks towards social and economic resiliency as they become kind of isolated islands within the rest of Chelsea. So mixed with these housing preservation policies, empty storefronts can be programmed to provide more affordable amenities and community spaces.
Our last areas of intervention were 6th, 7th, and 8th Avenues, where the challenges were flooding, carbon emissions, and air quality, and our strategies were pedestrian-centric streets, rain gardens, direct air capture, and raised subway grades. So pedestrian-centric streets are streets that have less area dedicated to managing vehicular traffic and are designed for more pedestrian interactions. They are able to work at different scales, so they wouldn't have to take up like the entirety of an avenue. They could take up, the avenue for like 3 or 4 blocks. They could take up half of it so that cars can still pass through, but more spaces dedicated to pedestrians. And the benefits with that would be it would reduce the air pollution and noise pollution from excess traffic. It could reduce street crowding. It provides pedestrians with outdoor spaces tailored to their needs. By discouraging motor vehicle traffic, it would encourage walking and biking, which would make it safer and more accessible. And since you wouldn't need to have all the hard asphalt the whole time, if it was just pedestrians walking, it could increase permeable ground space. We also looked at rain gardens, which are gardens with plants that are meant to absorb and hold larger amounts of water. So it wouldn't just be like grass, it would actually be plants that are meant to absorb that water. And this can work at any scale, especially those smaller scales as well. So they can be appropriated into existing right-of-ways with ease. It would manage stormwater more efficiently, and by creating plant life, it can mitigate the heat island effect. Direct air capture is another tool we looked at where carbon dioxide is captured directly from the air and then either stored safely or recycled into raw material. This would improve the air quality in urban areas and reduce the harmful effects of polluted air. They can be entirely solar powered or wind powered, depending on the location of the capture system. It would not need to interrupt existing infrastructure. This example here just shows a picture of it incorporated into like a bench, a seating area. So you wouldn't have to do anything too intensive to incorporate this intervention. And to require less land and fewer resources than the number of trees you would need to filtrate the same amount of air. We also looked at raised subway grates, which are elevated 1 to 2 feet above street level to prevent floodwaters from pouring right down into the subway system. This would prevent any water damage and keep the subways running. And it can also be incorporated into benches or bike racks as seen here. This intervention was also put into various areas of New York City, and it has had some success in those locations. So this is the interventions map, where we are showing that the sewer vents along 6th, 7th, and 8th Avenue are then raised to avoid flooding and then transformed to provide additional seating. The one-way cross streets, we are looking at converting to become pedestrian streets so that it can create a more human connection between the avenues. And this would limit the idling pollution in residential areas and will provide more green space and public space. And the pedestrian streets are still spaced to provide two-way vehicle traffic at least every 600 feet. So you wouldn't have to be walking for like 30 minutes to get from one end of Chelsea to the other. You would still be able to take the car or the taxi or the public transportation in the form of a bus.
So this map combines the 3 intervention maps that we showed previously, and it shows where the possible proposed interventions could be in relation to each other to kind of create a network to start to become this green district. And then our future synthesis map shows, it's very similar, but it shows a possible future of Chelsea with the intervention spreading even further and creating a more complete network across the neighborhood. And in this case, the different categories of interventions would no longer be confined to their initial intervention sites. They would be spread throughout. So, thank you.
So, thank you. We have final thoughts and questions. We have a Google form document that we were thinking of sending in a Google chat, but we didn't see one
in the
Zoom chat. But if you guys have questions that you want to ask us, we're
more than happy to answer.
Yeah, we want to hear your thoughts, your opinions.
Well, thank you, Maya, Grace, Laura. This is really very impressive, and I want to congratulate you all on not only all of this work, but a really well done presentation. I only wish I was so articulate when I was in college. So congratulations to all of you. I think we'll turn it, we can share the link after. We don't use the chat function, so we won't be able to circulate it now, but happy to share that with the committee and the community later. If you want to take down the presentation, and we can just, unless folks have specific questions, I think we can just, so I'll open it. I'm sorry.
We could send it after, or if you would prefer, we could go over the survey questions like in our discussion, or it's kind of just whatever you all prefer that we do.
Sure. You know what?
We'll send it around. I was just gonna, we can send it around, Maya, or Grace, or Laura. Yeah, if you can resend that link to me, and I'll make sure I get it around to everyone.
Okay.
But for now, I'm happy to take any questions from the committee or comments about the work that was presented here. Well, then, sorry. Yep. We'll go to David and then Carrie and Marty. David?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the idea of the underground basins. And would they go, say, in the bottom of new construction, or would they actually be excavated? And are they just full of air? How do they work?
Okay, so we're still in the process of figuring out like all of the technicalities of like how they would work. It does vary depending on the size, but the overarching idea is that they would either be put in new parks that are getting created, or they would have to be put into current parks, which would require digging up and implementing them on, but they do have to be over permeable space. So we couldn't put them over or under a new construction for a building, because then there's no way for the water to actually get in there. I do not have the exact answers if it is full of air or how much water is normally stored in there at one given time, but we are in the works of like kind of figuring out the more technical details.
And all of that, of course, would depend on, again, the size.
Mm-hmm.
It has been implemented in some areas of Hong Kong.
On a really large scale, like
Yeah.
entire like soccer fields have these like massive basins underneath.
And
So
they were successful.
yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry?
I want to say thank you, and thank you very much for the holistic approach to resiliency that you presented. That's really impressive. I think that it's great to have ideas like this for when we speak to developers. We can always try to advocate for, one or all of these kinds of measures. I have one question, which is like this big compared to what you presented. I'm really actually fascinated because I'm thinking like, okay, so what could we do tomorrow? I'm kind of fascinated by the rain gardens because we have so many tree pits, and I'm pretty sure that the majority of tree pits that are planted in our neighborhoods are done by like the block associations and the community itself. So it might be something that we could action very quickly, especially now as it's about to be time to plant the tree pits, that maybe, we can guide people on better plants that have more, absorption. So maybe you can tell me a little bit more about that.
About like the specific types of plants, or about maybe the ideas of how the rain gardens could start to be like actively implemented now?
Yes, B.
Okay.
Or both. Yeah. If you know.
We don't have any specific types of plants necessarily that we researched, but I mean, it could even just be grass, like as long as it's permeable and would allow the water to like seep in. So I mean, that's as far as plants, but what?
Right. A lot of it has to do with like the specific soil, so that it has like enough, if like the soil is too dense, we want to have like room in the soil to be able to capture as much water as possible. So that's like one thing. It's not the vegetation, but the actual soil. And that's easier because you don't have to worry. So if the plants died and you're like, oh, well, we tried that, it didn't work. The soil's not really going anywhere. And as to how it could start to get implemented now, we thought that maybe like stewardship programs, where it's kind of like an adopt a tree kind of thing in your neighborhood, would be one way that you could do it. Another way is it would be more of like a top-down procedure, but like being like, okay, we're just going to go in and we're going to change the soil composition of these areas. But we talked with both Jeanette and Amy, and we thought that maybe more of like a stewardship bottom-up approach, with working with people in the area and being like, well, what type of trees do you want to see? What do you want this little plot of land to be? And then can you take care of it would be the best way to go about those, especially if they were more on pedestrian streets.
So if you guys have any specific recommendations for what that, exactly how to take an existing small plot like a tree pit and kind of change the composition of it to make it more resilient, and you could send that to us, that would be amazing, and we can pass it along to all of the block associations, because they are sort of that first tier of steward of their street.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
Great. Thank you.
Also, I will just add, thank you so much for your questions. that all this work that they're doing, this group and the other groups for the other areas of the West Side, will be compiled into a report that we'll be happy to share with you in a week or so. So hopefully you will find also some answers there, and your input, of course, will be.
Great, thank you. Marty?
I reacted to your talking about raising storm sewers and using that as a mechanism of controlling flooding. And that triggered in my mind the whole development of storm sewers in New York City, which goes back to the early 1800s and has a rocky career of polluting our rivers for a long, long period of time. It is now developed into a very large system of combined storm sewer systems, and separating it will be very, very expensive. I have heard a lot of people say there's no way that you can separate the storm sewer system. I think, just as a suggestion to your activities, that you should go against that trend in your presentations. And when you are talking about raising and dealing with streets, you should be talking, in my humble opinion, everywhere along the line, separating the storm sewer, the storm system from the sewer system, and forcing the buildings along that project to separate, to connect separately to the separate sewer system from the storm system. This will take a long time, but since the community board and others are talking about 99-year leases in various places, it seems to me it's not too early to start that project.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for that.
I agree.
That's a really good point.
Great. We'll go to, I kind of lost who had their hand up first, but we'll go to Viren and then Peggy and then Betty. Viren?
Oh, I just want to quickly jump in for two questions. First of all, amazing work. A lot of great ideas. As you know, some of them are difficult to achieve considering the sort of difficult agency coordination, working city, and implementing large-scale changes is always much harder than what we imagine. But at the same time, I really commend you for sort of length and breadth of ideas that you put together. So congratulations. It's amazing, very mature work, so to speak. So the second thing, just a full disclosure, I also teach. I'm an architect and urban designer myself. And I teach in a bunch of places, Columbia University, City College, and Pratt Institute sometimes. Not full-time, I just teach when I can. So some of these projects are very sort of close to what we amongst the sort of academia talk about. I just want to take on two things just for the sake of correction. Carrie's question about existing tree pits in New York City and particularly in Chelsea. In fact, they are basically bioswales. So they already been designed to take into account the potential flooding. And there are actually, if you really look up online, DOT will provide you a section. They're actually very properly designed with both soil as well as the type of trees that they grow there. And there is a cistern right below them, actually. So they're not simply tree pits any longer. Just as a kind of, it's a very interesting concept that DOT, they're already implementing slowly as they go. And you should really look at it. So, credit where credit's due. City is doing something right when it comes to our the second thing about CSO, which Marty mentioned, combined sewer lines overflow is the big problem that causes flooding. Part of what, again, the credit where credit's due, city has not done anything significant as yet, but around 2007, my office made a proposal to DDC, and fortunately we also knew the commissioner there. So the only thing we asked for was very simple request, which is similar to 1% for arts in New York City. So whenever there is a federal or local city or state funding for a project, 1% goes towards arts. And our proposal was very simple. Every time they dig up any street, they should put a parallel line. So in future, you will actually end up with separation of two systems. One is for stormwater, the one for sewer lines. So that's already being, sorry, I misstated the year. That was 2003, following 9/11. So it started actually with everything that was being done around World Trade Center. And they are, every time you see DDC and DOT dig up for any utilities or any sewer line repairs, they actually are putting this parallel line. Just as a piece of information, it's going to take years for them to complete the whole city. And the intention is you can't dig up the whole city to separate the two lines. So that's that. And then now I'm going to come back to your projects. I'm sorry if I'm taking all their time away from everybody, but just a few quick thoughts. Part of the West Side Highway and waterfront blocks are actually sitting above the water. So anything that you want to do below that is significantly harder because you already have water to deal with. So including the piers and the highway are actually literally floating. That's number one. Number two, water level is pretty high in Manhattan because it's surrounded by water, as you know, and the East River and Hudson River both are part of the estuary, which means that is something else that you have to deal with. So in terms of building any kind of infrastructure below grade along the edges of Manhattan is not going to achieve the same goal, unfortunately. So anything that goes beyond that flood zone is where you can actually do some sort of underground infrastructure. And then last but not the least, right below Chelsea and other parts of Manhattan, you have almost 7 layers of different types of utilities. So it's a major disruption that kind of is, just keep in mind, nothing impossible, but all of these kind of things come in the way of achieving what you would think should be very easy to achieve. So those are my few thoughts just for you to look at how the anatomy of Manhattan and New York City. There's a great book called Anatomy of the City that you should look up. It actually gives you sectional views of what these utilities look like. And at the same time, I like all the ideas of kind of creating parklands as sponges and potentially reusing some of the streets. I'm not reusing, but designing some of the streets to become those kind of conduits. An example I'll give you is Canal Street. It's called Canal Street because there's actually a canal below the street, and it is still there. It's been blocked off. It used to connect East River with Hudson River. And there's some ideas floating around where people are thinking that there might be ways of actually making some of that underground infrastructure connect both sides. Because the simple principle with water, when it comes to dealing with water, is if you block water, you just displace it. You do not get rid of it. So it's going to go somewhere else. It's going to find its own way. So that's the main principle behind it. And last but not the least, I sound like a teacher now, and I'm really sorry about it. There's a great book called SOAK, S-O-A-K, and you should look it up by Anu Mathur and Dakunha from Pennsylvania Landscape School of Architecture. And that talks about basically that don't fight water, live with it, learn to live with it, and channel it so that you can keep it away from yourselves and not let it invade sort of our built fabric. And I really apologize for a very long.
No, thank you, Viren. Thank you for, on behalf of Maya, Grace, and Laura, but also for the committee. That was very informative and great to know that we have such a resource. And to the extent I don't want to offer you to these students, but as they continue in their work, it may be helpful for them to continue to dialogue with you on these topics. We'll go, I think we said, Peggy, you'll be next, and then Betty.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Yes, I wanted to echo my gratitude. You guys, I learned a lot through this report, so thank you very much. With all the suggestions that you recommended, are they all being actively used, like somewhere in the world, or any of them, very like avant-garde, therapies? Or?
One that was really interesting, we had someone come in, or Jeanette, I believe she talked about it as one of the case studies, but pedestrian streets and kind of like reforming the streets in Barcelona. So like they did research into, you know, what were some of like the less used streets, and they looked into how far people were willing to walk. So they basically kind of did an overall assessment of movement and accessibility. And then they started to change some of the streets to make it so that some of them were just pedestrian, whereas other ones were very much more focused on like public transportation, and then other ones were focused on private. And that was something that we found really interesting. It seemed like a really ambitious but overarching good idea for long-term sustainability to carbon emissions, but also just general accessibility for anyone, whether it's economic or physical, and it also creates more welcome environment for the pedestrian. I know a really big critique that we look at history, at least in Syracuse, is kind of looking at how the city was designed for the car, and now we're looking back at it like maybe that wasn't the best decision to make. Maybe that wasn't the most ideal thing that we could have resulted in. So kind of looking back and seeing how we can still keep the car, but also really focus on the human being in the city. Sorry, that was the one that really interested me.
No, thank you. You know, is it possible in the report that is released to also include, you know, examples of where these different strategies are being, but you're probably already doing that, but that would be super helpful.
They will be included, yes.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Betty?
First, thank you so much, group, for the presentation. You have a lot of really creative, wonderful ideas. One idea I was thinking of, did you consider greening roofs or making gardens on roofs? I don't remember, did you say that or not? Because that is another way of absorbing rainwater and so on. Yeah, you thought of that, you got that in the report?
Well, it's not in our set of interventions simply because we already have so many, and we kind of prioritized the interventions that we included in this presentation so that it wasn't just like a giant long list of different things we could do. But we did consider green roofs and blue roofs and cool roofs, all kinds of rooftop interventions. We chose the ones that responded the most to the conditions that we saw in the site in our research.
Mm-hmm. And then one of the really big drawbacks with green roofs is the fact that a lot of the buildings, especially older buildings in Manhattan, cannot take the load that's on the building. So we want to, there's so many buildings that are like, they want to, but it's just not feasible. And even to do an assessment, it requires a lot of financial investment and resources. So ideally, every single roof on Manhattan would be able to have a green roof, but there's a lot of limitations, both financial and physical, that start to play into that. That really makes it a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, there may be some solutions, but we won't go into it now, where you can do things that are not too heavy, even on older buildings. Another thing, I was wondering about these berms that look very nice, that are like a hill, and it's between the water and the inland. I was wondering if you thought about the impact of access for people who want to get to the waterfront. Would that be a barrier? Did you think about the implications of berms?
We did. It's something that we've been working on as well in our other classes. And it's one of those things where there would be drawbacks. Like you wouldn't be able to just have that immediate, beautiful, like waterfront view. But there also isn't that threat of storm surge coming in and damaging all the buildings along the waterfront. So the ultimate goal was to be able to create almost this rising parkland. So you wouldn't necessarily see a direct visual to the waterfront, but the greenery and the landscaping and the pathways of the park would compel you to then be able to move through. So it would maybe feel more like a naturally uplifting topography as opposed to like a mound of soil plopped right in front of the waterfront. And it's like, you can't go here anymore.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting tension about that. And are you going to go to the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee as well to talk about that area? Yes, I see Paul is. Yes, yeah, they have a lot of illustrations of pocket parks in Hell's Kitchen, which you may or may not have seen before. Tiny little pocket parks that the community has developed, and it's an interesting example. Chelsea doesn't have what Hell's Kitchen has in terms of pocket parks.
I think, Betty, that maybe a different group that's part of this, is that right? Part of this group has presented. Didn't they already present
another
at your last meeting? So they're getting that feedback as well.
Okay, and then I was thinking it might be useful when talking about the west side of Manhattan to just explain a little bit about what is going on the East River. Maybe it's in your text of your report, the barrier and I don't know, I don't know very much about it, but this what has gone on for the East River. Anyway, great ideas. Hope you can keep going on this topic.
Thank you, Betty. Jesse, did you want to say something?
Just for the committee members, the presentation that the students did for Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use is in the Dropbox folder separately. So if you guys are interested in seeing that, you can view that on your own. It's also on our YouTube channel too, obviously, because the hearing already, the meeting already happened.
Thank you. Brad.
Maya, Grace, Lori, thank you. I was trying not to fall into the river during college, so I appreciate what you guys are trying to do here. I want to talk about something, as Viren was saying, that can actually be achieved. And a few things you did present, I think that this board has been talking about, and also on the environmental committee, is I think we've talked about is shutting down some streets. And I'm very interested in the feedback in how commercial deliveries were made. Were they done at nights? Because that's always the big fights, the economic impact. I would love to know more about that, because I think that is something that can be achieved. And with COVID-19 and taking over our streets, people really enjoyed it. And I'm on the meatpacking bid district, and they just want more and more around the neighborhood. So I'd love to hear more about that. And I want to know more about the collection of CO2, because those things can be added now in our committee. We've got some great council members, and we would love to hear and maybe be as what we call it, a pilot program to see really what happens and how much is collected. So those are two of my items, and thank you for your time.
All right. I can go ahead and talk about the pedestrian street with the idea of commercial delivery and drop off. It would have to, it's one of those things where it's unfortunately there isn't like a set answer to it. I think it would definitely probably be something that is more of a case-by-case basis. Could maybe be something that would be worked into the same schedule as trash pickup and recycling pickup, so that we have those same amenities coming in at the same time. One of the nice things about pedestrian streets is their flexibility. So while they do prioritize the the pedestrian, the person, there can be scheduled times where it's like, hey, you can still be in these areas, but know that these certain activities are going to be happening. And there's a wide array of how you can design them, but especially maybe along more commercial centered areas, they can still be designed to be driven through, but there would just be more of a restricted access in being able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Or, one of the, I guess building off of that, one of the ideas for these pedestrian streets is maybe like taking half of the street and making it into a pedestrian only area. So you're still kind of reducing the traffic and maybe the CO2 emissions in the area, but not completely cutting off the traffic altogether. And that might be a good way to get around some of the, commercial unloading and loading deals. So, and then are you looking at the air capture?
Yeah, for the air capture, that research was done a little more in depth by the students last semester, but there are like several companies that like specialize in like creating the technologies that you can just like put the direct air capture in. So, and they are like in, what's the word? In production, like right now, it's not just like an idea that they have in their head. So like that would be something that we might have to look a little more into our group to get like the actual like specifics of those things. But it's not a technology that's just kind of like too intensive to be able to put like throughout the city at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That would be great to get that info or company info, and we could reach out to them. That would be great. Thank you.
I had one question myself. You talked in the presentation, I think you called it permeable asphalt, and you described it as I understand the challenges in terms of repaving all roads, but you also described it as cost efficient. And I wondered if if it can be used. Often our streets are dug up and then repaved, if not in whole, in part. And I'm wondering if there are ways, what do you think the barriers are to begin integrating that as streets are repaved? And if it is cost efficient, it sounds like cost maybe isn't the barrier, and what you think the barriers might be.
It's more of like a long-term cost efficiency instead of like immediate, because since it requires a little bit less maintenance and doesn't crack or have as many potholes. But as far as like immediate cost, it might be a little bit more than if you were just simply repaving the street, because it would have to be completely taken up since, as we said, the pervious asphalt has to lay directly over the ground so that it can actually absorb the water.
So you do have to pull everything up.
Right. And some of the challenges that might come into it, I know this might seem like a cop-out answer, but it's new. So the specific people that provide pervious asphalt, the possible methods of implementation, as well as just kind of getting used to a shifting expectation of materiality. Sometimes that can be the simplest answer and drawback. We do not know the the specifics of what is the exact drawbacks, but the main one that we have identified is the fact that the undeniable question of we already have asphalt, we already have it, so why do we have to dig it all up to put in what already looks like the same thing, even if it is functioning differently?
Yeah, thank you. I think, we have seen a lot in Chelsea as there have been rezonings or different areas, literally whole streets be pulled up in its entirety. And so, I think that would also be something that as we make approvals or think about these things, understanding more about that and how we could advocate for that as a material that should be considered for the benefits that you described. We'll go to Mike, and then Viren will let you close us out, but I think we do want to kind of bring this home. But Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. It's about these permeable asphalt streets. The avenues that we have here have asphalt that goes on top of, I don't know how deep, but concrete. And my question is, where would the water actually go? I mean, you're talking about, Viren's nodding. I mean, that's just seems like it's almost impossible. When they dig up one of the avenues, it's a project. It's a huge construction deal. So I don't know if it really applies to the avenues, at least here, in any sense. Have you considered that?
Yes. So, but that in case it would be that there's a water collection layer that then gets transported to like the actual water systems. So
Oh, good. No, that answers my question. Perfect.
Okay,
So
good.
it's sort of like a mini one of these catch basin deals under the permeable asphalt, right? Okay,
Right.
good. Super.
Great. Viren, you can close us out.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. If you're talking about permeable, there's something called permeable asphalt. So you might want to consider that. And it will have to be incremental, just the way Jessica was saying just now, that you can't dig up the whole city and start replacing asphalt. But as you keep doing repairs, every time you do so, you can keep changing the type of asphalt that you have. And you could use permeable asphalt if you like. The other thing I would think about is something that they're doing in Bombay, which is to have what we call parking lane here. They call it carriageway. And the carriageway is basically paved with cobblestone. And it's grass joined cobblestone, which means it's not built concrete pad and then the sort of asphalt above it. So that's another sort of way of looking at potentially changing what you can. It's a low hanging fruit. There's no traffic running on it. So you could do that. It slows traffic down, number one. Number two, I would even extend it beyond the roadbed to the sidewalk itself. Every time we change the sidewalk, we should change either the material or maybe we should talk about grassed pavers. Grass pavers are like pavers which don't have fixed joints, meaning they're not filled with cement, right? So things like that you could consider. So then instead of calling this a green district, make it a blue district. That water is allowed to sort of permeate, it's allowed to sort of flow through. And I think that might be sort of a couple of quick things that you might want to consider.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, now our turn to thank you. It was really a fantastic presentation and you've done such great work. Jeanette, thank you for the guidance that you've provided them. And I think we can all feel hopeful knowing that people are thinking about solutions for our shared future. And send us the link so we can circulate.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. And for all the assistance throughout the process, and we really look forward to continue engaging.
Great, thank you. Carrie, I'll turn it to you for some old business.
Yeah, so we just thought it would be good to update, sort of report back on one, we'll do this regularly, but one issue that came up last month, which was, 417, 419, and 421 West 22nd, the LPC application for the installation of gates. We went before the LPC and testified on April 12th to deny the application, as you all know, and the LPC voted to approve the application, though it was not unanimous. So some progress maybe, but we just thought it would be good, since we have these long discussions often, to tell you what happened, and that is what happened. Also, the whole process of that in our meeting, going over to the full board meeting and sort of reversing ourselves, we know that doesn't happen very often, and we're going to work a little harder to try to manage our meetings so that that doesn't happen anymore. And that's it. That is the old business, unless there's any new business that somebody, David?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that at that public hearing, the Historic Districts Council, the Victorian Society, and there was one other group that spoke that also opposed the introduction of the gates. Anyway, the commission simply decided to send the architect back to the drawing board to make some modifications, but it looks like they'll ultimately go through.
Thank you.
And I'll just piggyback and say that, as Carrie mentioned, it's not incredibly unusual, but it is infrequent that change happens. And if anybody, like as Carrie and I being new chairs, and I know there are some people who are not veteran Chelsea land use or even CB4 members. So if anyone has any questions about that process or thoughts on that, please feel free to reach out to either of us. You have our emails, and feel free to be in touch, and we can talk through any questions you may have.
Unless there's anything else, I think that's our meeting for tonight. Nice and short.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
No, wait, we have a hand up in the attendees.
Oh, sorry, Peggy.
They see you soon.
Oh, sorry. I just had a question. Sorry about that. But regarding the report that we just said, the greening initiatives, like how are we planning on using that? Are we thinking of maybe some of these initiatives we'd want to throw some weight behind and really try and support, or some of these we could also use as part of our general, I'm sorry if you hear some noise too, my daughter's in the background, but some of these approaches would be try and integrate them in our, kind of daily approval processes. I don't know, just what the thoughts are.
I will say, without, being an expert on this, that one of the things that, when a new development comes before us, you'll always hear us ask for green space and, what are you going to do for the, to give back to the public. We can maybe be more specific, with some of these things and sort of, in addition to what we already ask for, to maybe ask, what are you doing to contribute to, greening Chelsea, specifically. I'm not sure if this is more of a pie in the sky ideation presentation versus what's realistic, but it would be really good, I think, to, I don't know, maybe Viren and Brad and, people who know a lot about architecture and building can tell us what's realistic to ask for, or, where we should start. But I think it's a great question, and we should definitely follow up. And I think we should do as much of it as we can. 22nd Street between 8th and 7th and 8th is blocked. 21st Street between 9th and 10th is now blocked. So, maybe we should be finding out if we can create some green space there instead of just having iron gates. Paul?
I'd like to follow up on that if I could. Peggy, I think that's a really great question. And I think that this presentation, although many of the items don't seem as if they're feasible today, as Carrie points out, having those ideas in our heads as we look at applications. We just went through, and Betty and Mike really were the leaders on this, is the Nycha redevelopment program. Maybe if some of these ideas were in their heads as they were going through that, we may have been able to see more of these implemented at Nycha. So to think about this more so, when an application comes in, is there an opportunity for us to think about options for greening the space, whether it's through resiliency, protection of floods, adding green space, changing rooftops, a whole variety of those items. So that's what I took from today.
Thanks, Paul. Viren?
Yeah, I think some of the ideas are difficult to sort of implement right away, but they are not too crazy. So in other words, certain effort on all sides will be required, particularly from the city agency side, because they block things off by throwing everything at you, including the kitchen sink, as to why it cannot be done. But yeah, the part of what they were presenting and the takeaways for me were pretty straightforward. There are two initiatives that are underway as we speak. There's Local Law 97, which is about curtailing carbon emissions within the buildings and rather than outside of the building. And major culprit, one of the major culprits of carbon emissions are buildings themselves. So that law is in place, and they're going to get more stringent in terms of requirements. So that's one thing. The second thing is in terms of roofs being converted into green. They're not specifically saying make them green roof as planted green roofs, but there are code requirements that require folks to do something about those roofs. So from blue roof to yellow roof to green roof, all three options are going to be required. So we should be kind of latching onto those low-hanging fruits, which basically we can go after. So even if it's a landmark property and somebody is putting up a little penthouse above, we can require them to comply beyond what the code requires. Code says green roof, which means you can actually use a particular product for the membrane and you will comply with that request. But if we can go in there and say, well, we're going to do more than that, and then we can specify what that might be, right? So I think there are those options available. And last but not the least, in terms of the pocket parks and what I keep calling the sponge pads parks, which can be as tiny as your sidewalk and as large as a sort of little park like Chelsea Park. So there's a lot more room for us to achieve some of these things as we go. And instead of going and asking for something in a sort of humongous scale, what we can do is every time you do something, this is what we would expect you to do at the same time, rather than say, change everything in Chelsea. So for example, Carrie, you just mentioned 2 blocks, the streets have been blocked. One of the things that I'd sort of suggested previously in a couple of meetings is that instead of putting those sort of barriers on either side, change the material there, make it hard for you to drive through at a very fast speed. And that is achievable. You make the surface permeable and you keep doing that as you go.
Thanks, Vera. And Jesse, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to make sure that we notice that there's someone in the public who has their hand raised. So I just,
Oh, no.
yeah, that's what I wanted to. I don't think it has anything to do with necessarily this. They might, but I just wanted to make sure we don't run off. We were about to run off.
Sorry. Thank you for that. We were about to run off. So can we bring over Alex Wald?
Paul, did you want to say something on this while we're doing that? And then, sorry, Carrie, but then we'll just make sure we
Sorry,
finish this topic.
I just didn't put my hand down. I apologize.
Okay.
Sorry.
Alex, yep, there you go.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Alex.
How's everyone?
Good, thanks.
This is my first meeting, but so if this has been addressed at any point, let me know, or if there's some initiatives already in the works. But I wanted to comment, find out what, if any, plans are in the works regarding, the crossings between the, riverfront or riverside parks and, across the West Side Highway, because it is particularly hostile to pedestrians. Not only while crossing are vehicles still permitted to make left-hand turns, you also have a bike path where, unfortunately, even though state law requires yielding to pedestrians, oftentimes it'll turn into a mini Tour de France. And I'm curious if there's any plan to construct perhaps a pedestrian bridge. There's one up, I guess, close by the Intrepid, but there are none. And I've found in all my different crossings that it's fairly difficult and not pedestrian friendly at all. And that's up and down the West Side Highway.
So your question is, do we know of anything in the works to create some kind of pedestrian bridge across the West Side Highway to Chelsea Piers?
Yeah, Chelsea Piers or anywhere along the stretch. Are there any initiatives to kind of bridge that? And if not, I think that, if that space is meant to be used freely, that it should be connected. Obviously we have a highway running down the length of Manhattan, but if that space is meant to be for people, it should be prioritized to have an access, an egress to that, and not be, cutting through a highway.
It's a good question. We are speaking to Chelsea Piers right now about their extension of their lease. And I know that one of the questions that we have is how to limit the roadway beyond the West Side Highway, so that where all the cars are, where the cars and production trucks are lined up, which are supposed to be more of a bike path, pedestrian pathway. So those discussions are being had. I don't know if anyone on the committee knows. I'm not aware of anything about a pedestrian bridge over the West Side Highway.
But maybe, I see Lowell's hand, but maybe we also want to connect Alex to our transportation committee where they deal more specifically with this issue. But Lowell, did you want to?
Yeah, there has been talk about a pedestrian bridge coming off of the High Line extension, part of the High Line expansion piece. We've been focused on the part connecting it to Moynihan through Manhattan West, but there is another piece that's been considered for expansion of the High Line to go across 34th Street to Javits and then cross the West Side Highway to connect to whatever ends up being at Pier 76. So it has been contemplated, at least in that location. There are a number of issues that you run into with trying to build a pedestrian bridge, and that's having space on both sides, for the bridge to land. Is part of the biggest problem we've had dealing with, trying to get to Hudson River Park. Ideally, there should be one up in the 50s to connect to Pier 97 from DeWitt across, because there's no way to cross there really easily, but there's nowhere for it to land on the west side if you build a bridge. So that's part of the problem there. Like I said, it is under contemplation for 34th Street though. For Chelsea Piers, I don't think it's ever been discussed. Again, you'd have to get the best place to do it would be from Chelsea Waterside Park, but then you're giving up parkland for the pedestrian bridge. But that just from a parks perspective, from a Hudson River Park perspective, I can tell you that much.
Okay.
Thanks. Brad?
Yeah, Lo, I also know we kind of tossed around at the committee, basically what they did in Boston, the big dig. The reality is that highway should be below and the park should be on top. And if we're talking a 20-year plan, that would be the ideal answer. And I think it's time to talk about it because we've had a lot of change on the west side. There's a lot of federal money. They're spending billions to bring in the train. Be great to get some of that dollar. I mean, that's what we should be looking at. I know it took a Kennedy to get it through there, but we have a Schumer.
Yeah, Brad, you're talking about Westway. Look out for the striped bass.
So Alex, like Jessica mentioned, the Transportation Committee also meets once a month. Jesse, do you know when their next meeting is, or you can find it on the website? It would be great for you to go to that meeting as well and bring this up.
It's the third Wednesday of every month is the Transportation Committee. And I would also recommend maybe attending the Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee, just because I think the Hudson River Park is discussed at length at that committee. And that's really what always is the kind of the goal of a pedestrian walkway is to get to that park. So, and that's the Thursday after our full board meeting, not directly after, the week after the third. It's usually the second Thursday of the month. So we'll be picking that up in May.
Sounds good. Thanks. And just to jump back on, someone's asking about carbon capture technology. There's a company called the Air Company based here in New York that's doing carbon capture. They're actually converting it into perfume and I think a vodka, but they have the technology, and it's a New York based company. So maybe you could reach out to them if interested in installing or, partnering with them.
Thank you, Alex. That's great information.
I want to also just jump in to kind of tie together what Peggy was saying and some of what Brad and others were saying, that, if there are folks, I think we should wait and see what the students present back to us as their final product, of course. But if we want to spend some time with that and look at even our statement of district needs or the work of this committee for the year and say, what are things that we want to really look to explore more specifically as it relates to Chelsea or the district more broadly. And I think we can consider if we want to make some kind of work plan out of that or start building in some language, some goals, maybe even ultimately budget requests. Often Chelsea land use does not participate in, it doesn't often have a lot of budget requests when it comes time to that's part of the board's work, because so much is about approving, landmarks preservation specific, site specific thing. But maybe there are areas that we want to start really leaning into advocating for dollars to be devoted to specific topics. So I don't know that that would happen necessarily in this next budget cycle, but it could certainly be something that we as a committee work towards. Sorry, Carrie, I'll kick it back to you.
Jesse,
Brad.
next FCNY,
Say that again, Viren, sorry.
next FCNY project,
Yeah, yeah.
Hire a fellow and sort of do something for neighborhood specific issues.
Okay, then if everybody feels like they've said their piece, do we have to make a motion to end the meeting? Does anybody want to make a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Yep.
Okay, we're adjourned. We'll see you next month. Have a great month.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy
care.
spring.
All right.
Bye. Thank you all.